"Just kill me fast," she said. When the lonely mountain man lifted her skirt, he burst into tears. Out in the snow-choked Colorado mountains, a broken trapper finds a woman half dead in the drifts. But when he pulls her from the cold, he discovers something far worse than frostbite. Her body is covered in whip scars, and her eyes hold a secret she'd rather die than tell. He thought he'd buried Mercy years ago. She thought no man alive could still have a heart. But one storm-bound night, their worlds crashed together, her past hunting her through the snow, his faith fighting to be reborn. As riders close in and the fire of the cabin burns low, when the past comes to kill what's left of their souls, will love be strong enough to save them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind howled like a wounded beast through the snow-laden pines as Ephraim Coulter checked his last empty trapline. His broad shoulders hunched against the cutting February gale, and his weathered face ducked deeper into the fur collar of his coat. 20 years in these mountains had taught him the language of winter storms, and this one spoke of death. 3 days of checking snares, and nothing but wind-filled holes to show for it. Even the rabbits had more sense than to be out in this weather. The lonely whistle through the trees matched the hollow feeling in his chest, a feeling that had been his constant companion since Sarah passed 5 years ago. The fading daylight filtered gray through the heavy clouds, making the snow-covered landscape blur into shapes of white and shadow. Ephraim knew he needed to head back to his line shack soon. Even a man mountain-bred like himself couldn't survive a night in the open when nature showed her teeth like this. He adjusted his pack, the leather creaking with frost, and turned toward home. That's when he saw it. A dark shape half buried in the snow near the creek bank. At first he thought it might be a fallen deer, but something about the form nagged at him. The wind dropped for a moment, and his heart stopped as he made out the edge of a skirt rippling in the bitter air. "Dear Lord," he whispered, his first prayer in longer than he could remember. His legs were already moving, boots crunching through the crusty snow as he ran to the still figure. It was a woman, curled tight as a sleeping child, her clothes crusted with ice. Her skin had taken on the blue-white cast of deep cold, but when Ephraim pressed thick fingers against her neck, he felt a pulse, thready and weak. But there. "Hold on, miss," he muttered, though he doubted she could hear. Working quickly, he shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her frozen form. She was light in his arms as he lifted her, too light for a grown woman. The storm screamed around them as he began the trudge back to his shelter. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, built sturdy against the mountain winters. A thin trail of smoke still rose from the chimney where he'd banked the fire that morning. Ephraim shouldered through the door, ducking his tall frame under the low lintel. Inside, he laid the woman gently on his narrow bed, working fast to build up the fire in the pot-bellied stove. The room was sparse: 1 bed, a rough table, some shelves with supplies, and a few hooks holding tools and dried herbs. But it was warm and dry, and right now, that's what mattered most. As heat began to fill the small space, Ephraim turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. Her clothes were soaked through, and he knew from harsh experience that wet clothes could kill as surely as exposure. But the thought of undressing an unconscious woman made his weathered face flush with discomfort. "Forgive me, miss," he murmured, beginning with her frozen boots. "Ain't proper, but it's this or let you freeze." When he touched her ankle, her eyes flew open with a terror that struck him like a physical blow. She tried to scramble away, her movements weak and uncoordinated. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw with fear and cold. Just Just kill me fast." Ephraim stepped back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Ain't gonna hurt you, miss. You're safe here." He kept his voice low and gentle, the way he'd speak to a spooked horse. "Name's Ephraim Coulter. Found you half frozen by the creek. Just trying to help." She stared at him, with eyes that seemed too big for her thin face, darting between him and the door like a trapped animal. The fear in those eyes cut deeper than the winter wind. "Got some broth warming," he said, moving slowly to the stove where a pot simmered. "Reckon you could use something hot inside you." She didn't respond, but her gaze followed his every movement. Ephraim poured the broth into a tin cup and set it on the table, then backed away to give her space. "Can you manage on your own, or do you need help sitting up?" Her chapped lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried to push herself upright, but her arms trembled with the effort. Ephraim moved forward instinctively to help, but she flinched so hard the bed frame rattled. "Easy now," he soothed, freezing in place. "Won't come any closer without your say-so." Minutes ticked by in tense silence, marked only by the crack and pop of the fire. Finally, the woman gave a slight nod, though her body remained rigid with fear. Moving with exaggerated slowness, Ephraim helped her sit up, touching her as little as possible. When she was upright, he handed her the cup of broth, making sure her trembling hands had a firm grip before letting go. She sipped cautiously at first, then with desperate thirst. Some color began to return to her face, though her eyes never left him. When she'd drained the cup, Ephraim took it back and refilled it without being asked. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You're welcome." He settled onto the room's only chair, keeping his distance. "Those boots need to come off, miss. Frostbite's nothing to play with." The terror returned to her face instantly. "No, please. I won't touch without permission," he assured her quickly. "But if we don't tend to it now, you could lose those feet." She clutched the cup like a shield, shoulders hunched. After a long moment, she nodded again, though tears began to slide down her cheeks. Ephraim's throat tightened at her obvious distress. He'd seen fear before, in the eyes of wounded animals, in soldiers during the war. But this was different. This was the fear of someone who'd learned that human hands could hurt worse than any natural danger. Moving with careful precision, he unlaced her right boot first. As he eased it off, she made a small sound of pain but didn't pull away. The sock beneath was frozen stiff. When he removed it, his breath caught at the sight of old scars crisscrossing her ankle. The marks weren't from frostbite or accident. They were deliberate, the kind of scars that came from ropes or chains. Ephraim's hands began to shake, not from cold, but from a surge of emotion he hadn't felt in years. He looked up to find the woman watching him, fresh tears tracking down her face. But now there was something else in her eyes besides fear, a desperate question, as if she was waiting to see how he'd judge her. The weight of his own past pressed down on him like an avalanche. He remembered Sarah's gentle hands treating injuries after the raid, remembered her voice saying, "Their pain is not their shame, Bear. It's the shame of those who hurt them." His vision blurred as tears he thought had long since dried up welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with grief and understanding. "I'm so sorry for what was done to you." She stared at him for a long moment, then broke down, sobbing. Great, racking cries that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Without thinking, Ephraim reached out, and this time she didn't flinch away. She gripped his calloused hand like it was the only solid thing in a world of shifting snow. They stayed that way as the storm raged outside, two wounded souls finding an unexpected moment of grace in a one-room cabin high in the Colorado wilderness. Ephraim felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd thought was frozen solid, like the creek where he'd found her. When her sobs finally quieted, he carefully treated her feet with yarrow salve, wrapped them in clean bandages, and covered her with every blanket he owned. She was already drifting into exhausted sleep as he banked the fire for the night. Ephraim made himself a pallet on the floor, but sleep was long in coming. He lay awake, listening to the woman's steady breathing and the storm's fury. For the first time in years, he found himself praying. Not in silence this time, but in whispered words that merged with the wind. "Lord," he murmured, "I ain't been much for talking to you lately. Reckon I've been too busy being angry. But if you're still listening, help me help her. Show me how to be strong enough for both of us until she finds her own strength again." The wind seemed to gentle then, and Ephraim felt something like peace settle over the small cabin. Outside, the storm continued its wild dance through the mountains, but inside, two broken hearts began the slow work of healing. The night settled deep and cold around the line shack. Wind whistled through the timber chinks, but Ephraim had sealed most gaps with moss and mud over the years. He kept the fire stoked, feeding it precious wood from his carefully maintained pile. Every hour or so, he melted fresh snow in his copper pot, letting it cool to lukewarm before tending to his mysterious guest. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering words he couldn't make out, other times lying so still he had to watch carefully for the rise and fall of her chest. Her skin burned with fever despite the lingering cold in her extremities, a dangerous combination he'd seen before in his trapping days. "Need to get some water in you," he murmured, lifting her head gently. He'd torn one of his cleanest shirts into strips, dipping them in snowmelt, and letting drops fall between her cracked lips. Most of the water ran down her chin at first, but gradually she began to swallow. When she thrashed in fever dreams, calling out in terror, he spoke quiet words of comfort. "You're safe here. Ain't nothing gonna harm you. Just rest easy now." He'd found an old jar of bear grease in his stores, rendered fat he usually used to waterproof leather and treat tools. But he remembered Sarah using it for frostbite, mixing it with yarrow and other herbs. His hands shook slightly as he worked it into the woman's frozen feet and fingers, careful to keep his touch light and professional. The hours crept by like molasses in winter. Ephraim didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her there in the snow, half buried like some discarded thing. The image twisted something in his chest, making it hard to breathe. When she woke briefly near midnight, her eyes were clearer but still wary. "Where?" she started, voice barely a whisper. "My line shack," he answered, keeping his distance. "About 10 miles north of Clear Creek. Found you in the snow yesterday evening." She tried to sit up but fell back with a grimace. "I need to go." "Ma'am, with respect, you ain't going nowhere in this weather, and those feet need at least a day's rest before they'll hold you." Fear flickered across her face. "You don't understand. They'll—" She caught herself, pressing her lips together. "Ain't nobody gonna find you up here," he assured her. "Storm's covered any tracks, and I ain't exactly social with the folks down valley." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Could I know your name? Just so I ain't calling you ma'am all the time?" She turned her face away. "Better if you don't know it." Ephraim nodded, accepting this. "Fair enough. Reckon we all got things we'd rather keep to ourselves." As the night wore on, her fever spiked higher. She began talking in her delirium, pieces of phrases that made Ephraim's blood run cold. "Please, not the chains again, and I won't tell you where it is, and God, please let me die this time." He had to step outside once, into the biting cold, just to catch his breath. The moon had broken through the clouds, turning the snow-covered landscape into something alien and beautiful. He stayed there until his fingers numbed, letting the wind scour away his anger at whatever men had hurt her so badly. When he returned inside, she was shivering violently. Without thinking, he took off his heavy wool coat and laid it over her, adding to the blankets. The coat still held his body warmth, and gradually her shaking eased. Near dawn, he started a pot of venison stew, adding dried vegetables and the last of his precious salt. The familiar task helped settle his mind. As the aroma filled the cabin, the woman stirred, her nose twitching slightly. "Reckon you might be ready for something more substantial than broth," he said, spooning some into a bowl. He helped her sit up, propping her with his rolled-up bedroll, and handed her the food. She stared at it for a long moment, then took a cautious bite. Something like surprise crossed her face, perhaps at the simple fact that it tasted good, and she began to eat with careful determination. "Small bites now," he cautioned. "Stomach's got to remember how to handle real food." She managed about half the bowl before her hand started trembling too badly to continue. Ephraim took it before it could spill, setting it aside. Her eyes were growing heavy again, the brief surge of energy fading. "Thank you," she whispered, already sliding back into sleep. As she drifted off, Ephraim noticed a fresh sheen of sweat on her brow. The fever wasn't breaking. He touched her forehead gently, burning hot. She didn't stir at his touch, and that worried him more than her previous fear. He knew he needed to check her for other injuries, ones that might be festering and feeding the fever. The thought made him deeply uncomfortable, but he couldn't let modesty kill her. "Forgive me, miss," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. With careful movements, he lifted the edge of her torn skirt, looking for wounds that needed tending. What he found stopped his breath in his chest. Her legs were a map of cruelty, welts and lash marks, some old and silvered with time, others angry red and barely healed. These weren't random injuries. They were methodical, deliberate, the work of men who knew how to cause pain without killing. Ephraim's vision blurred as tears welled up and fell, dropping onto her scarred skin. He'd seen violence before, had dealt some himself during the war, but this was different. This was torture, pure and simple, done to someone who couldn't fight back. He thought of his Sarah, gone these 5 years, and how she'd tend to injured animals with such gentle hands. What would she think of him now, crying over a stranger's wounds? But he couldn't help it. Each scar was a testament to suffering, each mark a story of survival. The woman stirred, perhaps feeling his tears on her skin. Her eyes opened, confused and clouded with fever. "Why?" she started, looking at his wet cheeks with bewilderment. Ephraim wiped roughly at his face. "Because ain't nobody should have to bear such things," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Because whoever did this to you was wrong, and that's God's truth." She stared at him, something shifting in her expression. The wariness was still there, but underneath it, a hint of wonder, as if she'd forgotten such gentleness existed in the world. "You're safe here," he promised again, and this time her eyes held his, searching for truth. "I swear it before God and on my Sarah's grave. No harm will come to you while you're under my roof." A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She didn't speak, but her hand moved slightly toward him. Ephraim took it carefully, holding it like the precious thing it was, the first trust she'd chosen to give. They stayed that way as the dawn light began to filter through the single window, painting the cabin's rough walls with gold. Outside, birds began their morning songs, and the wind gentled to a whisper. Inside, something fragile and new took root between two wounded souls, the first tender shoots of healing beginning to grow. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Through the tiny window of the line shack, Ephraim watched sheets of snow dance on the wild wind. His guest, still more stranger than companion, had finally fallen into what seemed like real sleep instead of fever dreams. He needed to check the roof. The old shingles had been worrying him even before this blow came through, and now he could hear the occasional drip of melting snow finding its way inside. With practiced movements, he added 3 logs to the stove, making sure they'd catch before he headed out into the weather. The ladder to the roof was little more than wooden slats nailed to the back wall. Ephraim's boots found each rung by memory, even with the snow stinging his eyes. Up top, the damage was worse than he'd feared. 3 shingles had worked loose, leaving gaps where water could seep in and rot the timbers. "Lord," he muttered, then stopped. The word felt strange in his mouth, like a language half forgotten. When was the last time he'd actually prayed? Not just thought about praying, but really opened his heart to God. His fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the hammer as he started repairs. "Lord," he tried again, "I ain't—" The words stuck in his throat. What right did he have to ask for anything? After what he'd done in the war, after failing Sarah. A sound drifted up from below, so faint at first he thought it was just the wind. But no, it was singing. A woman's voice, weak but clear, carrying a melody he hadn't heard in 5 long years. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." The hammer slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. It hit the roof with a thud and slid, catching in the snow before it could fall all the way to the ground. Ephraim barely noticed. That hymn. Sarah's hymn. She'd sung it while cooking, while mending, while tending her little garden. Even at the end, when the fever had taken everything else, she'd hummed it between rattling breaths. "Streams of mercy, never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise." The voice from below faltered, then stopped. "I'm sorry," she called out louder. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I heard something fall." Ephraim had to swallow twice before he could answer. "No harm done. Just dropped my hammer is all." He forced his frozen fingers to move, retrieving the tool. "Didn't know you were awake." "The cold woke me." A pause. "And I heard you. On the roof." He grunted acknowledgement, focusing on the shingle in front of him, but his hands were shaking too badly to hold the nails straight. "I'm Lydia," she said suddenly, as if the words had escaped without permission. "Lydia Bell." The hammer slipped again, this time catching his thumb. Ephraim bit back a curse. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Bell." He tried to keep his voice steady, professional. Though I wish it had been under better circumstances. "Miss Bell now," she corrected quietly. Or rather, Widow Bell. Though sometimes I think widow implies more years of happiness than I had. Ephraim drove in another nail, harder than necessary. "Lost my wife, too," he found himself saying. 5 years past. The silence that followed felt heavy with shared understanding. Then, so soft he almost missed it. "That was her hymn, wasn't it? The one I was singing?" "Yeah." The word came out rough. Sarah loved it, said it reminded her that grace was like water, always flowing, even in the dry times. She sounds wise. She was. Ephraim blinked against the sting of snow. Just snow, he told himself. Wiser than me by far. He finished the repairs in silence, but the hymn seemed to hang in the air around him, echoing in his memory. When he climbed back down and stomped the snow from his boots, Lydia was sitting up in his bunk, wrapped in blankets. Color had returned to her face, though she still looked fragile as spring ice. "Your fever's broken," he observed, moving to stoke the fire. "Yes." She watched him work, her hands fidgeting with the blanket's edge. I want to thank you. For everything." Ephraim shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Any Christian would have done the same." "No," she said with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't have. Believe me, I know." Something in her tone made him look up, really look at her. The bruises on her face were fading to yellow-green, but the wariness in her eyes was still fresh as a new wound. "You said you lived near Gunnison?" he asked, trying to change the subject. She nodded. "Taught school there, before—" Her hands tightened on the blanket. "Before everything changed." "Teaching, huh?" Ephraim moved to the stove, where a pot of beans had been simmering. "Reckon that explains why you know your hymns." Music was always my favorite part of teaching. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The children loved it too, even the ones who couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. He spooned beans into 2 tin bowls, added a handful of dried apple slices to each. "Must have been good work." It was. She accepted the bowl he offered, waiting until he settled on his stool before continuing. "I had 23 students that last year. Little ones just learning their letters, bigger ones working on geometry." Her voice softened with memory. "They brought me apples sometimes, or wildflowers. Jenny Martinez made me a bookmark with pressed columbines." Ephraim ate slowly, watching her navigate between past and present. "What happened?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Lydia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, then lowered back to the bowl. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "Ain't my place to pry." "No, it's—" She took a careful breath. "Maybe it's time I told someone. But first, could you tell me about her? Your Sarah?" The request surprised him, but he found himself nodding. Fair trade, story for story. "Met her in Denver, 1868. I was running pelts down from the high country. She was helping at her uncle's mercantile." He smiled slightly at the memory. "First thing she ever said to me was that my boots were tracking mud on her clean floor." "And you fell in love right then?" "Nah. Took at least 2 or 3 more visits before she stopped glaring at my boots and started seeing me." The beans in his bowl had gone cold, but he hardly noticed. "We married that fall, built this place together, had 5 good years before the consumption took her." Lydia's eyes were soft with sympathy. "Did she suffer much?" "Some. But she never lost her faith, right to the end." Ephraim set his bowl aside. "That hymn you were singing, she'd hum it even when the coughing was bad. Said it reminded her that blessings could flow both ways." "Both ways?" "From God to us, and from us back to Him." He cleared his throat. At least that's how she explained it. I ain't much for theology myself. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, stirring her beans absently. "I used to be sure about such things," she said finally, "about God's plan, about good and evil. But now—" She shook her head. "Now I don't know what I believe anymore." Yeah. Ephraim understood that feeling all too well. "Reckon that's why Sarah was the better Christian. She never doubted, even when things got dark." "Or maybe," Lydia suggested carefully, "she just showed her doubts differently. Through music, perhaps." The thought had never occurred to him. He turned it over in his mind, remembering how Sarah's singing had sometimes carried an edge of pleading beneath the praise. "Your turn," he said gruffly, needing to shift the conversation. "If you're willing." Lydia set her bowl aside, pulling the blankets tighter around her shoulders. I suppose it starts with Thomas, my husband. He worked as a mail contractor, carrying packages and letters through the mountain passes. Her voice took on a distant quality, as if she were reading from a book rather than her own memories. We were only married 3 months when his mule team came back without him. They found his body 2 days later, shot through the heart. The mail pouch was missing. Ephraim frowned. Robbers? That's what everyone assumed at first, but then men started coming around, asking questions about Thomas, about his roots, about things I knew nothing about. Her hands trembled slightly. They didn't believe I was ignorant. They were convinced Thomas had told me something, hidden something with me before he died. The missing mail? She nodded. There was money in that pouch. Government funds meant for the Ute agency. Thomas must have discovered something about it, something he wasn't supposed to know. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The men who killed him wanted to make sure that knowledge died with him. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. The scars, the torture, all to find something she truly didn't know. Ephraim's hands clenched into fists. How long? He asked hoarsely. 2 years. The words fell like stones. They would have killed me, but they were afraid I might have told someone else first. So they kept me alive, kept asking questions I couldn't answer. She drew a shaking breath. I escaped during a storm like this one. They didn't think I'd risk freezing to death. But you did. Better to die free than live like that. For the first time, real steel showed through her fragility. I ran for 3 days before the cold took me. I was sure that was the end. Then you found me. Ephraim stood abruptly, needing to move. He paced the small cabin, 5 steps each way, while snow whispered against the windows and the stove popped with settling wood. These men, he said finally, they still looking for you? Probably. Lydia's hands worried at the blanket's edge. But the storm will hide my trail like you said, and they don't know this country like they think they do. No, Ephraim agreed grimly. They don't. He'd spent 20 years in these mountains, knew every game trail and hollow. If anyone came looking, they'd find more than they bargained for. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken implications. Then, unexpectedly, Lydia began to hum. The same hymn as before, but softer now, more contemplative. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. After a moment, Ephraim found himself joining in, his deep bass supporting her wavering soprano. The words came back to him like water from a spring, bitter and sweet and pure. Praise the mount, I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Their voices twined together in the warm cabin air, while outside the storm raged on. And somewhere in the harmony, Ephraim felt something long frozen in his soul begin to thaw. The night deepened around the cabin as Lydia's breathing settled into the quiet rhythm of sleep. Ephraim added another log to the stove, watching the flames lick at the fresh wood through the iron grate. The storm still raged outside, rattling the shutters and whistling through the cabin's weathered chinks. He glanced at Lydia's sleeping form, bundled in Sarah's old quilt. Her face looked younger in sleep, the lines of worry smoothed away. But even in rest, her hands clutched the blanket tight, as if ready to defend against unseen threats. Moving quietly, Ephraim retrieved Lydia's torn skirt from where it hung near the stove. The fabric was still damp, but warming. He'd promised to mend it. Might as well make good on his word while she slept. Sarah had taught him basic stitching, something he'd needed often enough in his years alone. He settled onto his stool, threading a needle by the lamp's glow. The rip wasn't too bad, started at the hem and ran about 6 inches up. As he turned the garment to begin his work, something crinkled beneath his fingers. Ephraim frowned, running his hand along the hem again. There, a stiff spot between the fabric layers, carefully sewn in. He held the skirt closer to the lamp, examining the stitching. These weren't the same desperate repairs he'd seen elsewhere on the garment. These stitches were neat, deliberate, hiding something within. His conscience wrestled with curiosity. This wasn't his business. But if Lydia was in danger, if this hidden thing was part of what those men had hurt her for. Making his decision, Ephraim took his knife and carefully separated a few stitches. A small envelope slid out, sealed with wax and yellowed with age. The paper was good quality, the kind used for important correspondence. "Thomas." Lydia's voice startled him. She was sitting up, staring at the envelope with a mixture of recognition and fear. "I'm sorry," Ephraim said quickly. "Found it while meaning to mend your skirt. Wasn't trying to pry." She shook her head, trembling. "I didn't know it was there. All this time—" Her voice cracked. "They kept asking where Thomas might have hidden something. I truly didn't know." Ephraim stood and brought her the envelope. "Your husband's writing?" Lydia took it with shaking hands. "Yes. I'd know it anywhere." She traced the careful script of her name on the front. "He must have sewn it in while I was teaching, the day before." She couldn't finish the sentence. "You want to read it alone?" She caught his sleeve as he turned to go. "Stay. Please." Her fingers tightened in the rough fabric. "I don't think I can face this by myself." Ephraim nodded and sat on the edge of his bunk, giving her space but staying close. Lydia broke the seal with unsteady fingers and unfolded the letter. The lamplight caught tears in her eyes as she began to read aloud. "My dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, something's happened to me. I pray it hasn't, that I'll be able to tear this letter up tomorrow and tell you everything face to face. But if not, you need to know the truth. The agency funds I was supposed to deliver last week, they were stolen before I ever picked up the pouch. Someone at the Treasury office in Denver is working with men out here, replacing real money with worthless paper. They're stealing from the Utes, from the government, from everyone. I found proof. Names, dates, amounts. But these are powerful men, darling. Men who'll kill to keep this quiet. I've hidden the evidence where they won't think to look, but I dare not tell you where. If they suspect you know anything, they'll—" Lydia's voice failed. Ephraim reached for the letter, but she shook her head and forced herself to continue. "If they suspect you know anything, they'll stop at nothing to make you talk. Better you truly don't know. Just know that I loved you, that everything I did was to make things right. If God is merciful, I'll be home tomorrow to hold you again. If not, burn this letter and forget about the money. Your life is worth more than justice. All my love, Thomas." The letter trembled in her hands. Ephraim watched as she pressed it to her chest, tears flowing freely now. "He tried to warn me," she whispered. "All this time he was trying to protect me." Her fingers moved to her side, where Ephraim knew the worst scars lay. "They didn't believe I didn't know. They thought if they hurt me enough—" "Show me," Ephraim said, his voice rough with contained fury. Lydia hesitated, then slowly pulled aside the blanket and lifted the edge of her borrowed shirt. In the lamplight, Ephraim could see what he'd only glimpsed while treating her injuries. A brand, crude letters burned into her flesh. "Liar." His hands clenched into fists. "Who did this? They never used names, just asked questions, over and over." She covered herself again, shrinking into the blankets. "The leader had a scar on his chin, like a knife slash. He's the one who—" She gestured to her side. "How many?" "4, usually. Sometimes 5. She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "They're still out there, looking for whatever Thomas hid. They won't stop. Ephraim stood, pacing the small cabin. His mind raced through possibilities, dangers, plans. These men had resources, power. They'd been willing to kill a mail contractor and torture his widow. If they tracked Lydia here... He turned back to her. "We need to burn that letter." "No." Lydia clutched it tighter. "It's all I have left of him. It's evidence, dangerous evidence." He gentled his voice. "You know the words by heart now. But if they find this..." She looked down at the paper. Thomas's last words to her. After a long moment, she nodded. "You're right." She stood on shaky legs and moved to the stove. With visible effort, she opened the iron door and held the letter to the flames. They watched it burn together, the paper curling and blackening until only ashes remained. Ephraim closed the stove door and turned to Lydia. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Long as you're here, ain't nobody going to harm you. I know these mountains better than any lowland thugs. If they come looking..." He let the sentence hang. Lydia studied his face in the lamplight. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You don't even know me." "Know enough." He thought of the hymn they'd shared, of Sarah's faith in mercy. "No, you didn't deserve what was done to you. No, them men need stopping before they hurt anyone else." "They're dangerous, Ephraim." "So am I." He said it simply, a statement of fact. "Difference is, I only get dangerous when protecting something worth protecting." A log shifted in the stove, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm's fury seemed to be easing, the wind's howl softening to a moan. "Thank you," Lydia whispered. She swayed slightly, exhaustion and emotion taking their toll. Ephraim steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "You need rest. We can talk more tomorrow." She let him help her back to the bunk, but caught his hand before he could move away. Will you pray with me? It's been so long since I felt safe enough to pray." The request caught him off guard. He hadn't prayed properly since Sarah died. But looking at Lydia's hopeful, fearful face, he found himself nodding. They bowed their heads together, and Ephraim searched for words he'd thought forgotten. "Lord, watch over us this night. Protect this woman what suffered so much. Help me keep her safe, and if it be your will, help us find a way to make things right." "Amen." "Amen," Lydia echoed softly. Ephraim squeezed her hand once before letting go. He moved to his pallet by the stove, but sleep was far from his mind. His thoughts churned with plans, precautions that needed taking. Come morning, he'd need to check his trap lines, not for furs now, but for any sign of pursuit. The letter had changed everything. What had been simple shelter from a storm was now something far more complicated. But looking at Lydia's sleeping form, Ephraim knew he wouldn't have it any other way. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had something worth protecting, worth fighting for. And fight he would, if those men came looking for her. The mountains had taught him patience, taught him how to wait and watch. Let them come. They'd learn what happened to wolves who tried to hunt a bear in his own den. Dawn broke cold and gray over the mountain peaks. Ephraim checked his gear one final time before stepping out into the crisp morning air. His breath formed clouds in the stillness as he secured his rifle to the saddle and tightened the straps on his pack horse, loaded with furs from his winter trapping. He glanced back at the cabin where Lydia slept. After finding the letter last night, sleep had come fitfully. He'd spent hours planning, thinking through what needed doing. The trading post was too public, too many chances for word to spread. But Henry Tall Elk's winter camp, that might be different. Henry was no ordinary scout. He was a friend who'd saved Ephraim's life twice during the wars, a man who understood the weight of debts and secrets. If anyone would know about strangers in the territory, it would be Henry. Ephraim knocked softly on the cabin door. "Miss Bell?" "Come in," Lydia called quietly. She sat wrapped in a quilt by the stove, her face pale but composed. The morning light caught the shadows under her eyes. She hadn't slept much either. "I need to make a trading run," he said. "Got furs need selling and supplies to get. Henry Tall Elk's camp ain't but 4 hours' ride." He hesitated. "You'll be safe here. Nobody knows these trails but me, and I'll be back before dark." Lydia nodded, though her fingers twisted in the quilt. "I'll be fine. Really." She managed a small smile. "I can even try to make soup from those dried vegetables you showed me." "Bolt the door after me," he said. "Don't open it for nobody but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That'll be our signal." 3 knocks, then 2, she repeated. "I understand." Ephraim turned to go, then stopped. If something happens and I ain't back by nightfall, there's a loose board under the bed. Cache of food, matches, map. Head north, follow the creek. 2 days' walk, you'll hit the mission station." "Nothing's going to happen," Lydia said firmly, but he saw the fear flutter across her face. "No, ma'am, it ain't. Just being careful is all." He touched the brim of his hat. "Lock up tight now." Outside, he waited until he heard the bolt slide home before mounting up. The morning was quiet, too quiet. No bird song, no squirrel chatter. His horses' hooves crunched in the fresh snow as they started down the trail. The ride to Henry's camp took longer than usual. Ephraim kept off the main paths, using game trails and creek beds where tracks would be harder to follow. He checked behind him often, scanning the ridgelines for movement. Nothing but wind in the pines and the occasional crow. By mid-morning, smoke from cooking fires marked Henry's winter camp. Ephraim approached openly, whistling a hymn tune to announce himself. 2 young Ute boys appeared from the trees, rifles ready but pointed down when they recognized him. "Uncle Bear," the older boy called out in English. "Henry said you might come." "Morning, Joseph." Ephraim dismounted, leading his horses. "Your father around?" "In his lodge." Joseph grinned. "He has coffee." The camp was small, just 5 lodges set in a protected hollow. Women worked at smoking racks of meat while children played in the snow. Several nodded to Ephraim as he passed. He'd known many of these families for years. Henry's lodge stood slightly apart, marked by the American flag he flew as a government scout. Smoke curled from the top, carrying the rich scent of coffee. Ephraim tied his horses and ducked through the entrance. "Brother." Henry sat cross-legged by the fire, 2 tin cups ready. His face was weathered, eyes sharp beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He gestured to a blanket. "Sit. Drink. Then we talk." Ephraim settled onto the blanket, accepting the coffee gratefully. They drank in comfortable silence, as they had countless times before. Finally, Henry set his cup aside. "You bring furs to trade," he said. It wasn't a question. "And questions to ask." "News first," Ephraim said. "Then we'll talk trade." Henry nodded slowly. "News is not good, my friend. 3 days ago, riders came through the valley. 4 men, well armed, asked at every camp about a woman." His dark eyes met Ephraim's. "Young woman," they said. "Pretty once, but marked now. Missing since before Christmas." Ephraim's hand tightened on his cup. "Bounty hunters?" "They showed no papers, spoke no law." Henry's lip curled slightly. "But they carried heavy purses, offered gold for information. Bad men, trying to look like good men." He leaned forward. "They said this woman stole money, said she killed her husband, said she must be found." "Lies," Ephraim growled. "All of it." "Ah." Henry sat back. So you have met this woman they seek. Ephraim set his cup down carefully. Henry, you know me. Known me 20 years. You know I wouldn't shelter a murderer. I know you shelter something precious, Henry said quietly. My wife saw your tracks yesterday. 2 sets of prints by your cabin door, one smaller than yours. And you come here instead of the trading post, where warm walls would welcome you. He smiled faintly. I am not blind, brother. Can't hide much from you, can I? Ephraim sighed. Her name's Lydia Bell. Her husband was a mail contractor, murdered by the same men hunting her now. They're after something he hid. Proof of theft from the agency funds, sounds like. Henry's expression darkened. Agency funds? My people's money? That's how it seems. Ephraim told him everything, finding Lydia in the snow, the letter, the brand. By the end, Henry's face was grave. These men, Henry said slowly. Did she say one had a scar on his chin? Ephraim tensed. She did. You know him? I know of him. Marcus Cole. He works for the Indian agent sometimes, but his true business is elsewhere. Henry spat into the fire. A snake who speaks with 2 tongues. Last summer 3 Ute children disappeared near his camp. Their bodies were found in the river. No proof, but... He shrugged. We know. We remember. Where is he now? The riders went north, toward the mining camps, but they will return. Henry studied his friend's face. You mean to protect her? I do. It will be dangerous. Cole has friends in Denver, in Washington maybe. Powerful, friends who do not want their stealing discovered. Don't matter to me who his friends are, Ephraim said flatly. He hurt her, branded her like an animal. That needs answering for. Henry was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he reached for a leather pouch beside him. Trade, then. Your furs for supplies and information. He began laying out items, coffee, sugar, ammunition. The snow comes again tonight. Heavy snow, I think. It will cover tracks, keep her hidden until the thaw. He added more cartridges to the pile. But after that, you must decide. Run with her or stand and fight. Ain't much choice there, Ephraim said. Can't run forever. Sooner or later, standing's all that's left. Then you will need help. Henry took a small Bible from his shirt pocket, wrapped in soft leather. I will send word to friends I trust. There are others who want Cole's evil exposed. He touched the Bible. The good book says there is a time for peace and a time for war. Perhaps this is both. War for peace, fighting for justice. They haggled briefly over the furs, more for form's sake than real bargaining. When the trading was done, Henry helped Ephraim load the supplies. The storm comes fast, Henry warned, looking at the heavy clouds building over the peaks. You should stay until morning. Ephraim shook his head. She's alone up there. Scared even if she won't say it. I gave my word I'd be back by dark. Then go carefully, brother. Henry gripped his arm. I will pray for you both, and I will watch for Cole's return. The ride back was tense. The wind picked up, driving sheets of snow that cut visibility to a few yards. Ephraim let his horse pick the trail, trusting the animal's instincts more than his own in the whiteout. His mind churned with what he'd learned. Marcus Cole. The name felt like poison in his thoughts. A man who murdered children, who tortured women for profit. The kind of man Ephraim had once hunted before Sarah's death broke his taste for violence. But now... The snow thickened, but Ephraim pushed on. The horses struggled through drifts, steam rising from their flanks. By the time the cabin came into view, the storm was howling in earnest. He dismounted stiffly, leading the horses to the lean-to shelter. They'd need extra feed tonight, with this weather. As he unsaddled them, movement caught his eye, a shadow by the cabin door. His rifle came up smoothly, but it was only Lydia, wrapped in his spare coat. She must have heard the horses. 3 knocks, he called over the wind. Then 2. She smiled with relief as he demonstrated, then unbolted the door. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of soup. She'd kept the fire fed, he noticed, and even swept the floor. I was worried, she said, helping him bring in the supplies. The storm came so fast. Had to get back, didn't I? Made a promise. He stamped snow from his boots. Something smells good. Vegetable soup like you showed me, and I found some dried apples to stew. She hesitated. Did you learn anything? In the camp? Ephraim set his rifle in its rack, considering his words. No point hiding the truth. She'd face it sooner or later. 4 men been asking after you, offering gold for information. He watched her face pale. One of them's Marcus Cole. You know him? Her voice shook slightly. Know of him. Henry Tall Elk told me some things. None of it good. He stepped closer, seeing the fear in her eyes. Listen to me now. Storm's going to keep you hidden a while longer. But after that... He took a deep breath. After that, we got choices to make. Running's one, fighting's another. I won't ask you to fight my battles, Lydia said quietly. You've done too much already. Ain't your battles no more, Ephraim said. Man who hurts women, kills children, he's everyone's battle. Sides, he managed a small smile. Reckon the Lord put you in my path for a reason. Been hiding up here too long, letting evil men do as they please. Maybe it's time that changed. Lydia studied his face for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders, something like hope flickering in her eyes. What do we do now? Now. Ephraim moved to the stove, holding his hands to the warmth. Now we eat that soup you made. Then we plan. Henry's got friends who'll help when the time comes. But first, we wait out this storm. He looked at her steadily. Together. Outside, the wind howled louder, but the cabin walls held firm. They had food, fuel, and ammunition. Most importantly, they had time. Time to prepare, time to plan. And when Cole and his men finally came looking, they'd find more than just a frightened woman alone. They'd find a bear, awake and ready in his den. And this time, Ephraim meant to do more than just survive. The days after Henry's warning blurred together in a rhythm of survival and small victories. Morning light would filter through the cabin's frosted windows, finding Ephraim already stoking the potbelly stove, while Lydia insisted on making breakfast. Her hands grew steadier each day as she measured coffee into the battered pot or stirred corn mush in the iron skillet. You don't have to do all this, Ephraim said one morning, watching her set out tin plates. You're still healing. I need to do something, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. Sitting idle only makes me think too much. She placed a steaming bowl before him. Besides, you've done more than enough for me already. Ephraim noticed she moved with less pain now, though she still favored her right leg where the frostbite had been worst. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow shadows, and some of the haunted look had left her eyes. She'd taken to humming hymns while she worked, soft melodies that filled the cabin's silence. After breakfast, Ephraim showed her how to bank the stove's coals to keep heat through the day. His big hands demonstrated the proper way to layer ash over embers. Like tucking them in for a nap, he explained. They'll sleep quiet till you need them. Lydia's fingers mimicked his movements carefully. My father used to say a good fire was like a faithful friend, she said. It asks little and gives much. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Her voice held old grief. He taught at the mission school where I later worked, before the raids. Ephraim nodded, not pressing for more. They each carried losses like stones in their pockets, weighing down every step. But somehow the burden seemed lighter when shared. As Lydia grew stronger, she insisted on helping with more tasks. Ephraim taught her to mend snare wire with pliers, showing her how to twist the metal just so. Her teacher's hands proved nimble at the work. Soon she could repair traps as well as he could, though the cold still made her fingers clumsy. "You're a quick study," he said, watching her finish a particularly neat splice. "Had to be," she said, testing the wire's strength. Teaching 30 children with 1 slate and 3 readers means learning to make do. They worked together in the lean-to shelter, patching worn spots in leather harnesses and sorting through Ephraim's collection of trap parts. The physical labor seemed to help Lydia's spirits. Each small accomplishment brought a spark of pride back to her eyes. One afternoon, she found his medicine box while organizing supplies. Her fingers traced the careful rows of dried herbs and tincture bottles. "You know healing work?" "Some." Ephraim measured out willow bark for tea. "Learned from the Ute women, mostly. My Sarah was forever getting sick, so I paid attention." It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name aloud in months. The sound of it hung in the air between them like frost. "Was it consumption?" Lydia asked softly. "Fever. Bad one." He tied the willow bark in a scrap of cloth. "Nothing I knew could break it. Prayed till my knees bled, but..." He shrugged, the old bitterness rising. "Reckon God had other plans." Or perhaps he knew she needed rest, while you still had work to do here. Lydia's voice was gentle, like helping a half-frozen woman who'd lost her way. Ephraim couldn't meet her eyes. "Been a long time since I reckoned God had any use for me." "He often works through broken vessels," she said. "My father used to say that's how the light gets in." That evening, as wind keened around the cabin corners, they sat by the stove drinking willow tea. The lamp cast warm shadows on the log walls. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, but inside was warm and quiet. "Tell me about your Sarah," Lydia said suddenly. "If you don't mind speaking of her." Ephraim was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to talk. He told of meeting Sarah at a camp meeting, how she'd laughed at his clumsy courting, how she'd followed him into the mountains without complaint, making beauty from rough cabin life, how she'd loved wildflowers and morning light on snow. "Buried her up on the ridge," he said finally, "where she can see the sunrise. Put my Bible with her. Figured she'd have more use for it than me." "You stopped believing then?" "Stopped everything. Praying. Hoping." He stared into the stove's glow. "Just seemed easier to go numb." Lydia's voice was soft in the lamplight. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds." The words hit him like a physical blow. He remembered Sarah reading that same verse, her voice weak with fever. The memory was sharp as broken glass. "Some wounds don't heal," he said roughly. "They do," Lydia answered, "but first you have to stop reopening them." She reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm from the tea mug. Ephraim couldn't look at her, but he didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, while the lamp burned low and snow whispered against the windows. The silence between them was comfortable now, like a shared blanket against the cold. Later, as Lydia banked the stove for night, she began humming again. Amazing Grace, this time. The melody wrapped around Ephraim like a memory. He remembered Sarah singing it while she kneaded bread or mended his shirts. But tonight the tune didn't hurt quite as much. Instead, it felt like the first warm breeze of spring, promising that winter, no matter how long, must eventually yield to new growth. When Lydia finished the hymn, she turned to find Ephraim watching her with an odd expression. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Just thinking. Maybe—" He cleared his throat. "Maybe tomorrow I could show you the ridge where Sarah rests, weather permitting. Reckon she'd like your singing." Lydia's smile was gentle as morning light. "I'd like that very much." They prepared for sleep then, Lydia in the bed, Ephraim on his bedroll near the stove. But before blowing out the lamp, Lydia spoke again. "Mr. Coulter?" "Thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for—" She paused. "For trusting me with your memories. I know how precious they are." Ephraim was quiet for a moment. "Reckon some memories need sharing," he said finally. "Like spring water. Gets stagnant if it's dammed up too long." The lamp went out, leaving only the stove's glow. In the darkness, Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." Ephraim lay awake long after her breathing settled into sleep. The verse echoed in his mind, mixing with remembered hymns and Sarah's laugh and the sound of Lydia humming as she worked. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, like ice breaking up on a frozen river. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt, the kind that comes before healing. Outside, the storm continued its lonely song. But inside the cabin, two broken souls had begun to mend, stitch by careful stitch, like Lydia's neat repairs on the trap wire. Not perfect, perhaps, but stronger at the broken places. The night deepened. The stove ticked as it cooled. And somewhere in the darkness, an old trapper found himself shaping words he'd thought forgotten. Not quite a prayer, but closer than he'd been in years. Morning came with unexpected brightness. The storm that had raged for days finally broke, leaving the mountain world wrapped in pristine white. Sunlight sparkled off snow-laden branches and turned icicles into prisms of light. Ephraim stood in the cabin doorway, breathing in the crisp air. Behind him, Lydia was already at work, sweeping the floor with quick, efficient strokes. The sound made him think of Sarah, but the ache was gentler now, like an old injury in fair weather. "Storm's past," he said over his shoulder. "Might be able to salvage what's left of the woodshed." The structure had partially collapsed under the snow's weight 3 days ago. They'd been burning through the indoor stockpile since then, and it wouldn't last forever. "I'll help," Lydia offered, setting the broom aside. She pulled on the spare coat he'd given her, one of his old ones that hung nearly to her knees. The sight made something twist in his chest. "Don't have to," he said gruffly. "Your ankle is much better." She tested her weight on it, barely favoring the formerly frostbitten joint. "And I'm tired of being useless." "Ain't been useless," he protested, but she was already pulling on boots, her movements determined. The shed lay half buried in drifts, its roof sagging dangerously to one side. They worked their way through the snow, Ephraim breaking trail while Lydia followed in his footsteps. The morning air was sharp in their lungs, their breath forming clouds that caught the sunlight. "Best start by clearing the roof," Ephraim said, studying the damage. "Before the whole thing comes down?" He showed her how to use the long-handled scraper, demonstrating the pushing motion that would slide the snow off in sheets. They worked steadily, finding a rhythm together. Lydia proved stronger than she looked, though she had to pause often to catch her breath. "Like this?" she asked, managing to clear a particularly stubborn patch. "Just so," he nodded. "You're getting the hang of it?" The work was good, simple and honest. Slowly, the shed's wooden bones emerged from their white shroud. When the roof was clear, They began digging out the scattered firewood that had spilled from the collapse. "Found another one," Lydia called, excavating a split log from a drift. She lost her footing slightly as she lifted it, and the wood slipped from her grasp. Without thinking, Ephraim reached out to steady her, his hands catching her waist. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen. Her back was pressed against his chest, and he could feel the warmth of her even through the heavy coat. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, like touching a lightning-struck tree. Lydia went very still. Then she carefully straightened, stepping away. "Thank you," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. A flush that had nothing to do with cold colored her cheeks. Ephraim cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his empty hands. "No matter," he managed. "Wood's slippery when it's snow-covered." They worked on in silence for a while, but something had shifted in the air between them. Ephraim found himself watching her more than the work. The graceful way she moved, how the sun caught golden glints in her dark hair. It had been so long since he'd noticed such things. The awareness made him uneasy, like a man who finds himself standing on thin ice. They had most of the wood collected when Lydia straightened up, brushing snow from her skirts. Her face was flushed with effort, but her eyes were bright. "I never thought I'd be glad for such work," she said, surveying their progress. "But it feels good to build something instead of—" She trailed off, her expression clouding. "Instead of just surviving?" Ephraim finished quietly. She nodded. "Yes, exactly that." They turned to the shed itself next. The main support beam had cracked, causing the collapse. Ephraim showed Lydia how to brace the walls while he worked to splice the broken beam. "Hand me that length of rope," he called from inside the shed. When she passed it through, their fingers brushed. This time, neither pulled away quite so quickly. The work was harder now, requiring concentration. Ephraim explained each step as he went, and Lydia proved an apt student. She asked intelligent questions and anticipated what he'd need next. "You're good at this," he commented, as she helped him secure a brace. "I like learning new things," she said. "When I taught school, I always told my students that—" She broke off with a small laugh, the sound startling them both. Ephraim realized it was the first time he'd heard her truly laugh. The sound did something strange to his chest, like a key turning in a long, rusted lock. "What's funny?" he asked. "I was about to lecture you like one of my pupils." Her eyes crinkled at the corners. "Old habits, I suppose." "Reckon I could use some schooling," he said, and was rewarded with another soft laugh. They worked through the morning, stopping only when the sun was high overhead. The shed was mostly repaired by then, though it would need more work to be fully sound. "Time to rest," Ephraim declared, seeing how Lydia's hands had started to shake with fatigue. "Need to get some food in you." Inside the cabin, they shared a simple meal of cornbread and dried venison. Lydia insisted on serving, moving about the small space with growing confidence. When she reached across him to pour coffee, a strand of her hair brushed his shoulder. The touch was light as a feather, but he felt it like a brand. Evening came early, as it always did in the mountains. They'd brought in a good supply of the recovered firewood, and the cabin was warm and close. Lydia sat by the stove, mending a tear in her skirt while Ephraim worked at the table. He'd found a piece of pine among the salvaged wood, a clean, straight-grained piece that spoke to his hands. Without really planning to, he'd begun to carve. The knife moved surely, finding the shape that waited in the wood. Lydia's voice rose softly in the lamplight. She was singing again, but not a hymn this time, an old ballad about love and loss and coming home. The melody twined with the scratch of his knife and the crackle of the fire, making a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. The cross took shape slowly under his hands. Nothing fancy, just simple, honest lines that spoke of something solid and true. He worked carefully, smoothing each surface until it felt right. Outside, a lone wolf called in the gathering dark. The sound echoed off the mountainsides, wild and lonely. Lydia's song faltered for a moment, then went on, weaving the wolf's cry into its melody. Ephraim looked up from his carving to find her watching him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. Something passed between them then, something as fragile as new snow and as strong as old pine. "It's beautiful," she said, nodding at the cross taking shape in his hands. "Been a while since I made anything like this," he admitted. "Fingers still remember, though." "The heart remembers too," she said quietly. "Even when we think we've forgotten." He had no answer for that. But as he turned back to his carving, he found himself humming along with her song. The tune came back slowly, like spring water finding its way through winter ice. The wolf called again, closer now. But its song didn't seem so lonely anymore. More like a prayer, rising up to touch the stars that were just beginning to shine in the mountain night. The lamp burned low. Lydia's voice grew softer, but never quite stopped. And in Ephraim's hands, the cross began to glow with the warm color of well-loved wood, as if it had caught and held some of the day's sunlight. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, like a benediction. Inside, two people who had forgotten how to hope found themselves remembering one small piece at a time. Between them, faith took shape like a carving emerging from raw wood, simple and strong and built to last. The memory came to Lydia in the space between sleeping and waking. She sat bolt upright on her pallet, heart pounding, the image crystal clear in her mind. Ephraim, who'd been stoking the morning fire, turned at her sudden movement. "The wagon wheel," she whispered. "How could I have forgotten?" Ephraim set down the poker. "What wagon wheel?" Lydia's hands trembled as she pushed back her blankets. "Thomas, my husband. He marked the place. A pine tree with a wagon wheel carved in its bark." The words tumbled out faster now. "Near Wolf's Head Ridge, where the old mining trail splits. He told me just before—" Her voice caught. "Before they took him." Ephraim crossed to her, his movements careful, measured. "You're saying you know where the money is?" She nodded, pressing her fingers to her temples, as if to hold the memory in place. "He made me memorize it. Said if anything happened to him, I should wait until spring and take it to the agency myself." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He never imagined those men would find him first, would come after me." "Wolf's Head Ridge," Ephraim repeated slowly. "That's 2 days' ride from here, maybe 3 in this snow." He studied her face. "You sure about this?" "I see it so clearly now." Lydia stood, wrapping her shawl tight around her shoulders. "A tall pine, standing alone. The wagon wheel mark faces east toward the sunrise. Thomas said it was an old freighter's mark, but he added his own sign, 3 small notches below, like an arrow pointing down." Ephraim was already pulling on his heavy coat. "We'll need Henry's help. He knows those trails better than anyone, even in winter." He paused, fixing her with a steady look. "You understand what this means? Going after that money puts us all at risk." "I have to make this right," Lydia said firmly. "Those funds were meant for the Ute Agency, for supplies, for medicine. While they're missing, suspicion falls on innocent people. Thomas died trying to expose the truth. I owe it to him, and to everyone hurt by this, to finish what he started." Something shifted in Ephraim's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Reckon some debts need paying," he said quietly. "Some wrongs need setting right." They prepared quickly, gathering supplies while the pre-dawn light grew outside. Lydia changed into her sturdiest skirts and boots, adding extra layers against the cold. Ephraim packed food, blankets, and tools they might need for digging. The sun was just touching the mountain peaks when they set out for Henry's winter camp. The snow had settled into a hard crust that mostly held their weight, making travel easier than it might have been. Even so, the cold bit deep. They found Henry already awake, tending his horses. He listened gravely to their story, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Wolf's Head Ridge holds many secrets," he said finally. "Some better left buried." He touched the small Bible he wore in his medicine pouch. "But truth has its own power. Like water, it finds its way to the surface." "Will you help us?" Lydia asked. Henry nodded slowly. "The agency feeds my people through the winter. If those funds were stolen by corrupt men, that theft hurts more than just your husband's good name." He began gathering his gear. Besides, 3 sets of eyes are better than 2 for watching the back trail. They set out within the hour, Henry leading them along hidden paths that wound through the peaks. He seemed to read the landscape like a book, finding passes and sheltered valleys Lydia would never have noticed. The journey was hard. Though Henry's route avoided the worst of the terrain, they still had to dismount often to lead the horses over treacherous ground. The cold never let up, and the wind carried ice crystals that stung their faces. They made camp the first night in a hollow protected by towering rocks. As they huddled around the small fire, Henry shared stories of his people's winter camps in these mountains, of the wisdom passed down through generations about surviving the harsh seasons. "My grandfather used to say that winter strips everything bare," he told them. "Shows the true shape of things." He looked meaningfully at Ephraim. "Shows a man's true nature, too." Ephraim stared into the flames. "Some things better stay buried." "No," Henry said quietly. "Some things must be faced in the light." Lydia watched the interplay between the two men, sensing old history there. She'd noticed how Ephraim deferred to Henry's judgment on the trail, how they communicated with gestures and glances born of long familiarity. They reached Wolf's Head Ridge late the next afternoon. The weather had held clear, but clouds were building to the west, promising more snow by nightfall. The ridge lived up to its name, a stark outcrop of rock that did indeed resemble a wolf's profile against the sky. "The trail split should be just ahead," Lydia said, straining to match her memories to the winter-changed landscape. They found it half an hour later, a fork in the old mining track, now barely visible under the snow. Lydia dismounted, turning slowly to get her bearings. "There." She pointed to a lone pine standing proudly on a small rise. "That's it, I'm sure of it." They approached the tree carefully, alert for any sign they weren't alone. The trunk was massive, its bark deeply furrowed with age. On the eastern face, weathered but still clear, was the carved wagon wheel mark. Ephraim ran his fingers over the carving. "Old freighter's mark, sure enough." He crouched, brushing away snow from the base of the trunk. "And here, the 3 notches pointing down." "Thomas said to pace 10 steps north from the tree," Lydia said, her voice tight with emotion. "Then look for a flat rock about the size of a dinner plate." They began searching, careful not to disturb the snow more than necessary. Henry kept watch from a higher position, his rifle ready. "Here," Ephraim called after several minutes. His boot had struck something solid beneath the snow. Working together, they cleared the area, revealing a flat stone that seemed oddly placed among its neighbors. The stone was frozen solid to the ground. Ephraim had to work carefully with his knife around the edges before they could lift it. Beneath was hard-packed soil, but as they began to dig, they found it wasn't as deeply frozen as it should have been. Someone dug here before, Ephraim said quietly. Within the past year or so. The soil hasn't had time to settle properly. Lydia's heart pounded as they continued digging. The hole grew deeper, their breath coming in white clouds in the failing light. Henry called down a warning about the approaching storm. Then Ephraim's tool struck something metallic. Working more carefully now, they exposed the corner of a strong box, its iron side stained with rust and soil. It took both of them to lift it free. The box was heavy, sealed with a padlock that had partly corroded. Ephraim studied it for a moment, then brought the butt of his rifle down hard on the lock. It broke with a sharp crack that echoed off the ridge. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, they found stacks of paper money and several bags of coins. Lydia's hands shook as she lifted out a packet of documents, letters and ledgers in her husband's careful handwriting. "This proves it," she whispered. "This proves who really stole the money." She looked up at Ephraim, tears freezing on her cheeks. "We can make it right now." Ephraim nodded slowly. "Aye, we can." He began repacking the strongbox. "But first we have to get it, and ourselves, off this ridge alive. Storm's coming fast." They reburied the broken lock and the stone, trying to leave as little trace as possible of their presence. Henry helped them secure the strongbox to his strongest pack horse. As they mounted up, Lydia took one last look at the old pine with its wagon wheel mark. So many lives had been changed by what lay buried beneath it. Her husband's death, her own suffering, the hardships faced by the Ute people when the agency funds went missing. "We're doing the right thing," she said softly. Ephraim drew his horse alongside hers. "Reckon so," he said, "though right things often come with a price." "Worth paying," Henry called down from his position ahead of them. "Truth usually is." They rode away as the first snow began to fall, the strongbox secure between them. Its weight was more than just physical. It carried the weight of justice delayed, of wrongs that needed righting, of redemption waiting to be claimed. Lydia felt something shift inside her as they left the ridge behind. The burden of secrecy she'd carried for so long had been replaced by a new sense of purpose. Looking at Ephraim's broad back as he rode ahead of her, she sensed a similar change in him, as if by agreeing to help return the stolen money, he was also taking a step toward his own redemption. The snow fell harder as they made their way down from the ridge, but Lydia barely noticed the cold. Her heart was warm with the knowledge that at last, after so much darkness, she could see the path toward light. The evening settled cold around their small camp, tucked into a protected hollow below the ridge. Henry had found them a good spot, sheltered by towering rocks that blocked the worst of the wind. A small fire cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, and the horses dozed quietly at their picket line. Lydia sat close to the flames, grateful for their warmth. The strongbox rested beside her, covered by Ephraim's spare blanket. Its presence felt like a weight, but also like a promise, a chance to set things right at last. Ephraim worked quietly at the edge of the firelight, brewing coffee in his battered tin pot. The familiar routine of camp life had settled over them, Henry keeping watch from a high point, Ephraim tending to practical needs, Lydia sorting through their remaining provisions. "Might snow again before morning," Ephraim said, passing her a steaming cup. His voice was soft, meant just for her ears. "But we should make the agency by tomorrow afternoon if we start early." Lydia nodded, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin. "I never thought I'd see this day," she admitted. "When I was—" She paused, the memories still raw. "When they had me, I thought I'd die with the truth buried." Ephraim's face tightened at her words. He opened his mouth to respond, but a sharp whistle from Henry cut through the evening quiet. In one fluid motion, Ephraim snatched up his rifle and moved to place himself between Lydia and whatever had caught Henry's attention. The sound of hoofbeats approached their camp, steady and unhurried. A single rider, by the sound of it. Ephraim's finger rested alongside his rifle's trigger guard, ready but disciplined. "Evening, folks," a voice called from the darkness. "Mind if I share your fire? Getting mighty cold out here." The rider emerged into the firelight, and Lydia's world tilted sideways. The cup slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, spilling coffee across the frozen ground. She knew that voice, had heard it speak of God's love while dealing out cruelty, had heard it promise salvation while delivering damnation. "Now, is that any way to greet your husband, Mrs. Rowe?" Preacher Amos Rowe sat easily in his saddle, smiling down at their camp as if he'd been invited to Sunday dinner. He looked exactly as Lydia remembered, handsome in a practiced way, with silver threading his dark hair and crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He wore a black coat with a preacher's collar, and his mare was well fed and groomed. Ephraim's rifle hadn't wavered. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Ride on." Rowe's smile didn't falter, but his eyes, cold and calculating despite his warm tone, fixed on the covered strongbox beside Lydia. "Now, brother, is that Christian charity? I've been searching for my dear wife for so long, praying for her safe return to the fold." "I am not your wife." Lydia found her voice at last, though it shook. She forced herself to stand, refusing to cower before him. "You lost any right to call me that when you sold me to those men." Rowe's expression shifted to one of pious sorrow. "Oh, my dear, is that what they told you? That I sold you? Those criminals who took you from our home, they filled your head with such terrible lies." He began to dismount, his movements deliberate and smooth. "Stay in that saddle," Ephraim warned, the rifle tracking Rowe's movement. Rowe paused, then settled back in his seat. "I see they've poisoned you against me, precious one. But I've come to take you home, to restore what was lost." His gaze slid again to the strongbox. "To make things right." Lydia felt bile rise in her throat. How many times had she heard him use that gentle, reasonable tone while twisting scripture to his purposes? How many times had she watched him convince others to trust him, only to betray that trust for his own gain? "The only thing that needs making right is the return of the agency funds you stole," she said, her voice stronger now. "The money meant for winter supplies for the Ute people. The money you used to pay your gambling debts before you sold me to cover what was left." Something ugly flickered across Rowe's face before his mask of concern returned. "You're confused, my dear. Sick with the things those men did to you. But I'm here now. I'll help you remember the truth." "The truth?" Lydia laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even her. "The truth is written on my skin, Amos. Every lash, every burn, every scar. They're your doing, as surely as if you'd held the whip yourself." Henry's voice came from above them, calm but carrying authority. "The law will be interested in that truth, preacher. When we return the money to the agency, they'll want to know how it came to be stolen." Rowe's mask slipped further, showing a flash of the rage Lydia remembered all too well. "The law?" He straightened in his saddle. "I am an ordained minister, a respected member of the community. Who do you think they'll believe? A half-breed scout? A mountain hermit? A woman who abandoned her husband and God?" "They'll believe the papers in that strongbox," Lydia said quietly. "Thomas's letters, the ledgers showing where the money went, your signature on the documents, Amos, your guilt in black and white." Rowe's facade cracked entirely then, his face twisted with naked greed and fury. "You stupid woman, do you think I tracked you all this way just to let you ruin everything? That money is mine. I earned it, suffering through years of frontier circuits, preaching to savages and sinners." "Last warning," Ephraim growled. "Ride out now, or I put you in the ground." Roe's hand twitched toward his coat, but Henry's rifle cracked once, sending bark flying from a tree inches from the preacher's head. Roe jerked his mare's reins, turning her away from the camp. "This isn't over," he snarled, all pretense of piety gone. "I'll be back with the law. They know me in every town from here to Denver. They'll believe my word over yours, a grieving husband searching for his poor, addled wife. Maybe I'll tell them how this mountain man bewitched you, stole you away. They hang horse thieves in this territory. Wife thieves too, I expect." "Ride," Ephraim said simply, and something in his tone made even Roe pause. The preacher wheeled his horse around, but called back over his shoulder. "I'll see you soon, precious one. We have so much to discuss about honor and duty and keeping faith with one's husband." They watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night. Only then did Lydia's legs give way. She sank to the ground, shaking uncontrollably. Ephraim moved to her side, his rough hand gentle on her shoulder. "He won't touch you," he promised. "Never again." "You don't know him," Lydia whispered. "He'll find a way. He always does. Sweet words and false scripture, turning people against each other. He'll make them believe whatever he wants them to believe." Henry descended from his watching post, rifle still ready. "Then we need to move fast. He'll gather men, come after us. We should break camp now, ride through the night." Ephraim nodded. "Agreed. But not toward the agency. That's what he'll expect. We'll head north first, through the high country. Make him work to follow our trail." They began breaking camp with swift efficiency, erasing all signs of their presence. The fire was scattered and covered with snow, the strongbox secured again on the pack horse. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving out into the darkness. Lydia rode close to Ephraim, her mind racing. All the peace and purpose she'd felt earlier had shattered at the sight of Amos's face. She knew what he was capable of, not just physical cruelty, but the slow poison of lies and manipulation. He would turn every town against them, every lawman into a weapon. "I'm sorry," she said softly to Ephraim's back. "I've brought this trouble to your door." Ephraim turned in his saddle to look at her. In the starlight, his expression was soft despite its weathered lines. "Trouble finds its own way," he said. "But so does grace. Remember that." They rode on through the night, three shadows moving through the vast wilderness. Behind them, Lydia knew Amos Roe was already spinning his web of lies, gathering men who would believe his false words and righteous anger. The race to reveal the truth and survive long enough to tell it had begun. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, as they pushed deeper into the mountains. The strongbox bumped steadily against the pack horse's flanks, its contents worth so much more than mere money now. It carried the proof of one man's corruption and the key to another woman's freedom. Lydia touched the scars on her wrists, hidden beneath her sleeves. She had survived Amos Roe's betrayal once. With Ephraim's strength beside her and Henry's wisdom to guide them, she would survive him again. This time she wasn't alone. The mountain night pressed close around the cabin, stars diamond bright in the frigid air. Inside, Lydia stirred the coals in the stove, while Ephraim cleaned his rifle by lamplight. Henry had ridden out hours ago to check their back trail, worried about tracks he'd spotted earlier. A soft whistle from outside made Ephraim's head snap up. 3 short notes. Henry's signal. But something in the tone made Ephraim's neck prickle. He moved to the window, keeping to the shadows. "Something's wrong," he murmured. Before Lydia could respond, a flaming arrow arced through the fur, darkness, and struck the cabin's roof. Then another and another, lighting up the night with deadly fireflies. "Get down!" Ephraim lunged for Lydia as bullets splintered through the window. They hit the floor as more shots cracked through the thin walls. Smoke began seeping through the ceiling boards where the arrows had struck. "The strong box," Lydia gasped. "We can't let them. Your life's worth more than money." Ephraim army crawled to his gun rack, grabbing extra ammunition. The roof was catching now, flames spreading across the dry pine shingles. A familiar voice called from outside. "Come on out, Mrs. Rowe. Your husband's mighty worried about you." Lydia's face went white. "Amos found us." More bullets punched through the walls. Ephraim returned fire through the window, hearing a cry of pain answer his shot. Smoke was getting thicker, making them both cough. 6, maybe 7 riders, he said, counting the muzzle flashes. "They're trying to smoke us out." A horse's scream cut through the night, followed by Henry's war cry. Gunfire erupted from a new direction as their friend charged the attacker's position. "Henry, no," Ephraim muttered. But he knew what his friend was doing, creating a distraction, buying them time. The roof was fully ablaze now. Burning debris began falling through the ceiling. Ephraim grabbed Lydia's arm. "We have to move. Stay low." They crawled toward the back door as the battle raged outside. Henry's rifle cracked again and again, answered by multiple guns. Through the smoke, Ephraim grabbed essential supplies, ammunition, his knife, a water skin. Lydia snatched her husband's letters from their hiding place and the wooden cross Ephraim had carved. The cabin was becoming an inferno. Heat pressed down on them as more of the roof collapsed. Ephraim kicked open the back door, checking for ambushers before pulling Lydia through. They emerged into chaos. The burning cabin cast everything in hellish light. Horses screamed and men shouted. Henry's voice rose above it all, calling out in Ute, drawing fire away from them. Ephraim and Lydia crouched behind the woodpile. 20 yards away, Henry was using a fallen tree for cover, firing methodically at the scattered attackers. But even as they watched, a bullet caught him in the chest. He fell back but kept shooting. "We have to help him," Lydia whispered frantically. Ephraim's heart twisted. He knew that look in Henry's eyes, the look of a man making his final stand. "He's giving us a chance. We have to take it." As if hearing them, Henry called out between shots. "Go, I will hold them here, brother." "Henry." Ephraim's voice broke. "Go." Henry fired again, hitting another rider. "Take her to safety. This is a good day to die defending friends." Tears froze on Lydia's cheeks as Ephraim pulled her away. They stayed low, using the smoke and shadows for cover as they moved towards the tree line. Behind them, Henry began singing a Ute death song between shots, his voice strong and clear. They reached the first trees as a bullet found Henry again. His song faltered but didn't stop. The attackers were shouting, moving to flank his position. Henry's rifle answered defiantly. "Keep moving," Ephraim urged, half carrying Lydia through the deep snow. The cold bit through their clothes. They hadn't had time to grab proper winter gear, but cold was better than bullets. 100 yards into the forest, Henry's rifle fired one last time. Then silence, broken only by the roar of the burning cabin. Lydia stumbled, sobbing. Ephraim wanted to stop, to run back, to die beside his friend. But Henry's last words drove him forward. "Take her to safety." They pushed on through the darkness. The cabin's glow faded behind them, but its light was forever burned into their memories. Ephraim's chest ached with each breath, and not just from the smoke. Henry had been more than a friend. He'd been a brother in all but blood, a light of wisdom in Ephraim's darkest days. "He knew," Lydia said suddenly, her voice raw. He knew they were coming. That's why he rode out earlier, to lead them away from us. But they must have caught him, forced him to give their signal. Ephraim nodded grimly. It made sense. Henry would have tried to protect them until the end. And he had succeeded. His sacrifice had brought them precious minutes to escape. The wind picked up, driving snow into their faces. Ephraim pulled Lydia closer as they walked, trying to share what little warmth they had. She clutched the wooden cross to her chest, its rough surface damp with tears. "We need shelter," Ephraim said after another hour of walking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving them shaking with cold and exhaustion. "There's a shepherd's hut 2 miles north. We can—" He broke off as voices carried through the trees behind them. Distant, but getting closer. Lantern light flickered through the forest. "They're tracking us," Lydia whispered. "Can't lead them to the hut." Ephraim studied the snow-laden branches above. "We need to hide our trail." They backtracked carefully, using their own footprints. At a fallen tree, Ephraim helped Lydia climb up onto the trunk. They walked along it for 30 feet, then jumped into a snowdrift, leaving no prints. From there, they waded through a half-frozen stream, the icy water burning their legs. The voices grew fainter, following their false trail. But they couldn't stop moving. The cold would kill them as surely as Amos's men if they didn't find shelter soon. Lydia stumbled more frequently now, her sodden skirts weighing her down. Ephraim's own hands were going numb. The cross and letters seemed to grow heavier with each step. "Henry," Lydia murmured through chattering teeth. "He was singing at the end. What was the song?" "A warrior's death song," Ephraim replied, his voice thick. "About meeting ancestors with honor, about sacrifice protecting those you love." He swallowed hard. He died as he lived, building bridges between peoples, showing mercy to those who needed it. They walked in silence after that, each lost in memories of their friend. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the ghosts of Henry's last song. Somewhere behind them, a cabin that had been sanctuary burned to ash. And in that ash lay a good man who had given everything to save them. Dawn was still hours away, and the cold was deepening. They had lost nearly everything: supplies, weapons, the strong box of evidence. But they had survived, thanks to Henry's sacrifice. And they carried something more valuable than money or proof: the truth in their hearts and the strength to keep fighting for it. Ephraim pulled Lydia on through the darkness, one step at a time. Henry's last words echoed in his mind. Take her to safety. He would honor that final request if it killed him. His friend's death would not be in vain. The wooden cross pressed against Lydia's chest as they walked, its rough surface a reminder of both loss and hope. Like the faith it represented, it had survived the fire transformed. And like Henry's sacrifice, it would guide them forward through the long night ahead. Moonlight silvered the snow-laden pines as Ephraim and Lydia pushed through knee-deep drifts. Their breath came in ragged clouds, feet breaking through crusty snow with each exhausting step. Lydia clutched Henry's small Bible, carefully wrapped in her wool shawl, close to her chest. Ephraim's shoulders bent under the weight of more than just weariness. His mind replayed Henry's final moments, the sound of those last shots echoing in his memory. If he hadn't brought Lydia to the cabin, if he hadn't involved his friend. There, he pointed to a dark opening in the rocky slope ahead. Cave should be deep enough for shelter. Inside, they found the cave ran back about 15 feet, the entrance narrow enough to block most of the wind. Ephraim gathered what dry kindling he could find and started a small fire. In its weak light, He saw Lydia's hands trembling as she unwrapped the Bible. Her fingers were white with early frostbite. Without a word, he took her hands in his and began rubbing them gently, working life back into the frozen flesh. The silence grew heavy until Lydia's quiet voice broke it. "Dear Lord," she prayed, "receive the soul of Henry Tall Elk, who died protecting your children. He showed us your love through his sacrifice." Her voice caught. "And Lord, please don't let Ephraim's heart grow cold again. Don't let him turn away from your mercy like before." Ephraim's hands stilled on hers. He wanted to pull away, to retreat behind the walls of his grief. But Lydia's fingers tightened on his, and her simple prayer continued to fill the cave with something warmer than firelight. For the first time since the cabin burned, he felt tears slip down his cheeks. Not tears of rage or bitterness, but of release. The first pale light of dawn crept over the mountain pass, painting the snow in shades of pearl and rose. Ephraim spotted dark shapes against the white, boot prints leading to a fallen figure near a stand of aspens. "Henry," Lydia whispered, her voice breaking. They found him propped against a tree trunk, his buckskin shirt stained crimson. His eyes opened at their approach, bright with fever but clear with purpose. "Brother," Ephraim knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "We had to lead them away from you." Henry's voice came soft but steady. "The Creator guided my path." Lydia settled on his other side, brushing snow from his shoulders. Henry's gaze moved between them, a gentle smile touching his lips despite the pain. "Listen close," he said. "The snow, it can freeze more than flesh. Don't let it take your souls. The Great Spirit sends warmth through other hearts." His fingers tightened on their hands. "Promise me." "We promise," they whispered together. Henry's smile widened. "Good." His eyes drifted skyward, peaceful. "I see the morning star." With those words, his grip loosened, and he was gone. They buried him there, beneath a cairn of stones gathered from the frozen ground. Ephraim's hands bled from moving the rocks, but he worked without pause until it was done. Finally, he planted the small cross he had carved at the head of the grave. Lydia stepped forward, her clear voice lifting in song, a Ute melody Henry had often hummed around the evening fire. The strange, beautiful notes floated across the snow-hushed valley, a farewell and a blessing woven together. When the last note faded, Ephraim bowed his head. Henry's final words echoed in his heart. "Don't let the snow take your souls." The winter sun hung low over the White River Valley as Ephraim guided his horse through deep drifts. Lydia slumped against his chest, her breathing shallow. The strongbox pressed hard against his thigh with each step. "Hold on," he murmured, tucking the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "We're almost there." Through the swirling snow, the agency's stockade emerged, weathered logs stark against white. A bugle called out, and voices shouted commands. The iron gates creaked open as 2 soldiers approached, rifles raised. "Halt and identify yourselves." Ephraim raised one hand slowly. "We've come to return stolen funds to Agent Brady. This woman needs medical attention." The soldiers exchanged glances. "Dismount and come with us. You're both under arrest." Inside the compound, more soldiers surrounded them. They led Ephraim and Lydia to separate buildings, him to the guardhouse, her to the infirmary. Through the window, Ephraim watched an officer striding across the yard, brass buttons gleaming. Beside him walked a familiar figure in a black coat. Preacher Rowe. "Sir," one soldier reported, "these 2 claim to have the agency money." The officer, Captain Mills by his insignia, shook his head. "Reverend Rowe here already delivered the funds this morning. He's been most helpful identifying the thieves who stole it." A public, Ceremony tomorrow, Rowe announced, his voice carrying clearly. To honor an honest man of God returning what was stolen. Ephraim's hands clenched the bars as he watched Rowe smile and bow to the captain. In the infirmary window across the yard, Lydia's pale face appeared, her eyes wide with despair. The truth they'd fought so hard to bring lay buried now beneath Rowe's practiced lies. Morning sunlight streamed through the agency windows as people gathered for the ceremony. Ute elders in blankets sat dignified in the front row while soldiers lined the walls. Captain Haynes stood at attention beside the strongbox draped in an American flag. Preacher Rowe stepped forward, Bible in hand, his voice ringing with false humility. "Friends, I come before you having done the Lord's work. Tell them the truth." Ephraim's voice cut through the room as he strode down the center aisle, Lydia beside him. "Tell them how you sold your own wife to cruel men for gambling debts." Rowe's face darkened. "These are dangerous accusations." "Show them," Ephraim said softly to Lydia. With trembling hands, she turned and lifted the back of her dress, revealing the brutal brand marks. Gasps filled the room. "This man who claims to serve God did this to me," Lydia's voice carried clear and strong. "He took the agency money and marked me when I wouldn't tell where it was hidden." Ephraim stepped forward. "I too have sinned through silence. I once stood by while innocent people suffered, but this money belongs to the Ute families who go hungry while others profit from their pain." Rowe's hand flashed to his coat, drawing a revolver. "You self-righteous fool!" Ephraim didn't move for his own gun. "No more blood," he said quietly. The shot cracked through the room, but it came from a Ute guard by the door. Rowe crumpled, his bullet meant for Lydia flying wild. As women screamed and soldiers rushed forward, the guard lowered his rifle. "She spoke truth," he said simply. "I protect truth speakers." Captain Haynes surveyed the scene, then nodded slowly. "Justice comes in many forms. The money will go where it belongs, to feed the people." Fresh snow dusted the ground like powdered sugar as soldiers laid Preacher Rowe's body to rest. No hymns were sung, only the soft whisper of falling flakes marked his passing. Ephraim and Lydia stood apart from the small gathering, their breaths making clouds in the crisp morning air. Later that afternoon, the agency clerk, Mr. Harrison, called them into his warm office. Steam rose from 3 tin cups of coffee on his desk as he shuffled through papers. "The Ute Council wants to thank you both," he said, pushing a document forward. "We've been authorized to offer you positions here. The agency's expanding, new cabins going up for families moving closer to the school." Ephraim's rough hands wrapped around the hot cup. "What sort of work?" "We need experienced hands for the building crew," Harrison said, then turned to Lydia. "And a teacher. These children deserve more than just survival. They need education, hope." Lydia's eyes brightened. "Teaching again? I never thought I'd have the chance." That evening, they sat in Harrison's spare cabin, lamplight casting warm shadows on fresh, swept floors. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with its rich scent. For the first time in years, neither watched the door or started at sudden sounds. "Reckon we could do some good here," Ephraim said quietly. Lydia nodded, her face peaceful. "The children need so much, but they're eager to learn. Today a little girl asked me to teach her the alphabet." "And the building crew's solid men," Ephraim added. "Good workers who pray before raising walls." They sat in comfortable silence, the lamp's gentle glow reflecting off window panes that no longer held threats, only stars and softly falling snow. Spring painted the mountains in tender greens and soft wildflower blues. Melting snow fed crystal streams where winter's silence had ruled. At the agency settlement, New life stretched toward the warming sun. Behind the schoolhouse, Ephraim worked steadily, his hands moving with purpose over salvaged timbers from his burned cabin. He'd hauled them down from the high country, each blackened beam holding memories of that night of terror and flight. Now, transformed by careful planning and patient labor, they rose again as chapel walls. Children often gathered to watch him work, especially during their afternoon breaks from Lydia's lessons. They'd bring him water or help stack the smaller pieces of wood, chattering in mixed Ute and English. Some days, Lydia would join them, her slate and books set aside, offering him a cool drink and a gentle smile that made his heart lift like a morning bird. The chapel took shape slowly, deliberately, much like their own healing had. Ephraim carved simple crosses into the doorposts, his knife finding beauty in the fire-darkened wood. The children helped plant wild roses along the path, their tiny hands patting soil around tender roots. On a clear morning in early May, before the sun had burned the dew from the grass, they gathered at the chapel's newly hung door. Lydia wore a dress the color of mountain columbines, with Henry's small Bible tucked in her pocket. Ephraim had shaved clean and donned a new shirt, though his hands still bore the honest marks of his work. The agency children, arranged in 2 neat rows, began to sing Henry's beloved Ute melody. Their young voices carried pure and clear in the morning air, a bridge between worlds just as Henry had been. Some of the older Ute women wiped tears from their eyes, remembering the kind scout who had helped so many. Agent Harrison spoke the simple words that joined them in marriage. When it came time for Ephraim to take Lydia's hand, her fingers trembled slightly in his calloused palm. She looked up at him, eyes bright with tears and joy. "You didn't kill me fast," she whispered, her voice carrying all the weight of their shared journey. "You helped me live slow." Ephraim's weathered face softened with understanding. He glanced skyward, where morning light streamed down through young aspen leaves, dappling the chapel's new wooden steps with patterns like blessing hands. "Reckon God just took his time," he said softly, "same as us." The children scattered flower petals as they walked out together. Behind them, the chapel door stood open to welcome all who sought shelter, its burned timbers now witnesses to restoration instead of ruin. Like the spring itself, they had emerged from winter's grip into a season of grace, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal under mercy's patient care. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.